Welcome to Histro of Finance, where money, power, and history collide. In this world, nothing moves without money, and no money exists without debt. Every country on earth owes someone. The United States now owes over $38 trillion, the highest in its history. The European Union, about $14 trillion. Japan, nearly $9 trillion. Even oil-rich nations like Saudi Arabia, or industrial giants like China and Germany, carry mountains of debt. But here's the paradox. If every nation is in debt, who's the creditor? If the entire world owes money, then who exactly is owed? This is the story of how debt became not just a number, but the engine of civilization. Because debt isn't simply a burden. It's the invisible architecture of the modern world, the birth of the debt. Machine to understand how we arrived at a world drowning in over $315 trillion of debt, nearly 3 times the size of the global economy. We have to rewind. Long before credit cards, digital transfers, or online banking, debt was born not in commerce, but in conflict. The year was 1694. England was at war with France and out of gold. Desperate for funds, the crown turned to wealthy merchants for help. In exchange for future taxes, these merchants would lend money to the king. It was a simple yet revolutionary idea. The state could spend money it didn't yet have, and in return, lenders received something even more valuable than gold. A promise, a government promise, backed by the power to tax, to endure, and to repay. To manage this, the Bank of England was created. That institution changed everything. For the first time in history, a government's debt became tradable. You could buy it, sell it, lend it, borrow against it, and just like that, money became trust backed by the state. France copied the idea. The Netherlands perfected it. The United States adopted it to finance its revolution, and later its expansion westward. Soon, national debt wasn't a mark of weakness, but of strength. The ability to borrow meant the ability to rule the empires once conquered territory to mine. Gold. Now they issued bonds to mine. Interest. The battlefield became the balance. Sheet. The world becomes its own creditor fast. Forward 3 centuries. The debt system that began as a wartime necessity is now the foundation of the global economy every country owes. Every bank lends. Every citizen, through taxes, savings, and pensions, is both debtor and creditor. Global. Debt is rising by roughly $1 trillion every 100 days, and the web of who owes whom has become so tangled that there's no single creditor left. Let's start with the United States. Of its $38 trillion debt, about half is held publicly, owed to investors, not the government itself. 2/3 of those investors are American institutions, banks, pension funds, mutual funds, and the Federal Reserve. The remaining third, around $9 trillion, belongs to foreign holders. Japan leads with about $1 trillion, followed by China with roughly $800 billion, and then the UK, Luxembourg, and Belgium. So when people say America is in debt to China, it's true, but only partly, because the truth is that most of America's debt is owed to America itself. The Treasury issues bonds, banks, and funds buy them. The Federal Reserve often buys them back, creating new dollars in the process. Taxes pay the interest, which flows back into American retirement accounts. It's a perfect circle. A mirror where the creditor and debtor are one and the same. And this mirror doesn't stop at America's borders. Japan lends to the U.S. through treasuries. The U.S. lends to Europe through the IMF. Europe lends to developing nations through the World Bank. And developing nations lend back by parking reserves in Western bonds. It's a planetary game of hot potato, except the potato is made of promises. Every nation holds someone else's IOU, and every promise is backed by another promise. Imagine a poker table where every player has borrowed chips from the next. The only rule keeping the game alive? Nobody stands up. He markets, the masters of money. Behind this web of promises lies a fourth player, the most powerful of all, the markets. Hedge funds, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks control tens of trillions in assets. They decide which countries can borrow cheaply, and which will pay a premium for survival. When markets lose confidence, entire economies collapse overnight. Crisis doesn't start in parliaments. It starts in yield curves. When investors panic, currencies crash, governments fall, and nations rewrite their futures. Democracy decides who governs markets, decide who survives. And at the center of this global orchestra sits the modern high priest of finance, the centrals. Central banks don't just manage debt, they manufacture it. Every time they buy government bonds, they create new money in exchange. The liability of one balance sheet becomes the asset of another. Every dollar, every euro, every yen represents a unit of debt somewhere else. There's no such thing as debt-free money. Every coin, every bill, every digital transfer has an invisible IOU engraved upon it. When confidence breaks, for decades, this global debt machine has kept spinning, powered not by repayment, but by confidence. As long as investors believe governments will pay interest, even if never the principal, the system works. But when belief cracks, everything shakes. We saw it in Greece, 2010. When the government's debt became unpayable, bondholders panicked. Yields exploded. The European Central Bank and the IMF stepped in, but their rescue came with a price: austerity. Tax hikes, spending cuts, mass unemployment, an entire generation sacrificed to restore confidence. In Argentina, repeated defaults turned debt into a curse. In Sri Lanka, fuel shortages and political collapse followed when foreign currency ran dry. Each time the system breaks, the invisible creditors suddenly have faces. The IMF, the rating agencies, the anonymous bondholders who hold entire nations by the throat. And yet, even after collapse, the same story restarts. Old loans are refinanced. New promises replace the broken ones. The machine resets, not repaired, but rebranded. Because in the modern age, debt isn't meant to be repaid, it's meant to be rolled over. Governments today don't aim to clear their debt. Not now, not ever. That's not a conspiracy. It's policy. Debt works like a subscription. Interest is the rent you pay to stay inside the system, and that rent, the global flow of interest, is now the lifeblood of the world. The economy, the heartbeat of capitalism, the global financial system is like a shark. It must keep swimming to survive. If debt stops growing, the system stops breathing. The United States will never pay off its $38 trillion debt. It will refinance it forever. Japan's debt exceeds 250% of GDP, yet its interest rates hover near zero. Why? Because investors don't want repayment. They want renewal. For them, government debt isn't a liability. It's the safest collateral in existence. A U.S. Treasury bond isn't a burden. It's the foundation of global markets. Banks use it as security. Pension funds rely on it for stability. Central banks treat it as money itself. If Washington ever decided to pay off its debt, global finance would collapse overnight. The dollar supply would shrink. Liquidity would vanish. Deflation would spiral. The system would destroy itself. So instead, governments keep issuing more. Not recklessly, but rhythmically. Like a heartbeat, debt pulses through every pension, mortgage, and market on Earth. That's why when politicians talk about balancing the budget or paying off the national debt, they're selling a comforting illusion. The real goal isn't to eliminate debt. It's to sustain belief in it, because once confidence fades, the numbers stop mattering. Interest rates spike, currencies crumble, and the world's economic engine seizes. The illusion of ownership, here's the final twist. When we say, we owe it to ourselves, that's only half true. Interest payments don't flow equally through society. They flow upward, from taxpayers and workers to investors and institutions. Debt isn't just a transfer between nations. It's a transfer between classes. That's why global inequality and global indebtedness rise together. The system rewards those who own debt and punishes those who pay. Creditors aren't villains. Debtors aren't victims. They're two sides of the same machine. The problem begins when the machine runs out of fuel, when new borrowing can't keep up with the promises made before. At that moment, the question, who's the creditor, stops being abstract and becomes painfully personal. Because at the top of this global pyramid, there isn't one villain. It isn't China. It isn't Wall Street. It isn't the IMF. It's all of them. And it's us. We've turned debt itself into money. Governments issue it. Banks multiply it. Investors trade it, and citizens depend on it. Debt once meant bondage. Today, it means balance. But if that balance ever tips, the illusion ends, and we'll remember what debt truly is. A promise that can't be kept forever. If this gave you a new way to see the world, don't forget to subscribe to Histroa Finance. We're now a community of over 2,000 subscribers, and growing every day. Here, we uncover the hidden forces behind every empire, every crisis, and every dollar in your wallet. Because history doesn't just repeat, it compounds. And in that compounding lies the real story of money, the story of us. This is Histroa Finance, where money, power, and history collide.